Todi is an excellent example of a well-preserved Italian hill town. It's a fascinating medieval gem in the heart of Umbria. And yet Todi is off the beaten track of tourists. It's one of those authentic places that are not crowded, but Italians in the know are quite familiar with it because this village is so wonderful. It's next to the Appenine Mountains with a patchwork of vineyards and olive groves. Because we're on a hill, the surrounding lowlands can gather mist, sometimes with a magical lighting effect. It's an old-fashioned small town with a friendly atmosphere. Todi is located about 40 kilometers from Perugia in a straight-line distance, 100 kilometers from Siena, and 150 kilometers from Florence. During our Todi visit, we'll be focusing on the little pedestrian lanes and the piazzas lined with historic buildings. We'll see monumental arches in the old fortified walls. Todi has quite a few of these little pedestrian alleyways. No cars here, just people walking and residences, apartments lining these little narrow lanes. While it is a very old town, there are quite a few young people living here. If you're out walking in the morning, you'll see them on their way to class. These narrow curved lanes can be a little confusing, so you might get a bit lost. It's a small town, you can't get too lost. But you have a choice. Do you want to just go wander or follow a particular route that will bring you to most of the good parts of town? To help you out, we're going to offer an efficient route, and then after covering those main lanes, you're free to go wander on the little side alleys. We're going to take you on a comprehensive walking tour of Todi, starting in the southern part of town, and then we'll go up to the northern side, and then we'll have a closer look at the streets around the piazza. But to properly see this little town in that way, you're going to need a couple of days. You'll be rewarded with a rich experience. We're going to make it easy for you to get around and see everything. On the main piazza, you'll find the official Tourist Information Office, which is a handy place to get some free maps and brochures, get some information about restaurants and hotels, and ask about what's a good route to go walking on while you're in the city. You can get the little map. It's a handy map, and it shows the 3 main streets of town and gives you indication of the little side lanes. The central Piazza del Popolo will always be the main focus of your visit, a good home base with its attractive cafes and strategic location. You'll come back here many times as you wander north and south and east and west. It just takes 15 minutes to reach the edge of town from here in every direction. It has been the center of town for 2,000 years, ever since the Romans established their forum here, with its origins going back much earlier, perhaps even to the Umbrians, 1000 BC. Considered to be one of the most beautiful medieval-style piazzas in the country. It's a lively place with people out walking and magnificent architecture all around. It functions like the outdoor living room and playground of the city, with shops, cafes, and important public buildings all around it. While cars are allowed to drive along the edge of the piazza, the main central part of the square is reserved for pedestrians. The cathedral rises at one end, and on the right, those arches lead into the Palazzo del Popolo and del Capitano. Palazzo del Popolo is where the governing council used to meet. It dates back to the beginnings of the 13th century, considered to be one of the first municipal buildings in Italy. Palazzo del Capitano houses the municipal offices and a museum. A large external stone staircase joins these 2 palaces together. We'll come back and see more of the piazza later in the program, but for now we want to get walking, heading down the main street of town, beginning our exploration of the shopping area and back lanes of Todi. Exiting the south end of the piazza brings you into Corso Cavour, the main shopping street of town. It looks like you are in a pedestrian zone, but surprise, cars do come through. They drive very slowly in courtesy to the people walking, but this is one of the main roads of town. You'll notice there are some side lanes leading off. Some of them are staircases rather than level streets. something typical in a hill town. These streets were obviously laid out way before there was any automobiles, perhaps as far back as the Roman times. And they were for pedestrians and horses and cows and goats and other animals. But now it's adapted to the modern world where we can have a mix of cars and people. This side lane connects Corso Cavour with Via Mazzini, another one of the main streets of town, and with a tempting sidewalk cafe. You'll see a beautiful fountain right along the central part of the main shopping street on the small Piazza Bartolomeo d'Alviano. The eagle statue at the center is a symbol of the city of Todi. Traditionally, he's the bird that chose this location to build a city, with shops and pizzerias nearby. Todi only has one main shopping street, here called Corso Cavour, and a little bit lower down it changes names to Via Roma, lined with very interesting shops for locals and visitors alike. Coming out of the southeast corner of Piazza del Popolo, you can't miss it. Of course, being Italy, you will always find wonderful places to eat. Pizza, pasta, and salad are the basics, accompanied by some local wine, perhaps at an outdoor terrace that offers a spectacular view across the countryside. This gateway is Porta Marzia, the oldest in Todi. Dates back to the 3rd century BC, built by the Etruscans as part of their first wall around the city. It was rebuilt in the 17th century with an elegant Renaissance balustrade up top. After this arch, the road changes name from Corso Cavour to Via Roma. A historic landmark, and yet traffic, including the bus, can drive right through it without even slowing down. Mass transit in a medieval city, another example of how Todi combines the old with the new. The arch seen here from the other side is the only survival from the first original wall that ran around Todi, dating back 2,300 years. Notice the beautiful staircase ramp leading up the hillside next to the arch. This is typical of the Umbrian and Tuscan hill town style of staircase on a slope. Shallow steps in the center surrounded by beautiful stonework that gives you an even path if you prefer that route, perhaps for your baby buggy or shopping cart. It is tempting to go up each and every one of these side lanes, but it can be tiring. We'll take a brief look at Via San Fortunato, which goes up from the arch to a church of that name, just having a quick glimpse at it to show you how it looks. We're not going all the way up this time. Show you how it looks on the map. We've come down the main lane, and if you took San Fortunato in the red line, you'd go up the hill, but we're going elsewhere around the bend to the same ultimate destination. It might seem like Todi is an open-air museum with an aging population, like in many Italian hill towns. However, this is a vibrant and modern city at the same time, with lots of young people. In the morning, I happened to see a bunch of high school kids walking down Via Roma through that archway on their way to class. The building is part of the campus of the State High School Jacapone, offering courses in human sciences, classics, science, and linguistics, with 700 students. The overall population of Todi, with its surrounding communities outside the walls, is about 17,000 people, of which 3,000 are students. Todi also has the country's oldest agricultural school, with special emphasis on cultivation of olive trees and vineyards for grapes and wine production. Their 500 students experience a school and work program with high-tech laboratories and farming out in the fields. With all of these educational opportunities, Todi attracts students from nearby regions, giving the town a delightful jolt of youthful energy. We're getting down towards the lower end of Via Roma, where it gets a little more quiet, but there are still some shops here. I dropped into a friendly restoration workshop to have a quick look at what was going on. Old towns have great need for restoration studios. At the southernmost part of Via Roma, we come upon an arch over the street, which was another gate in an ancient wall, called Porta Catena. This gate dates back to the Roman period. It's in the middle wall. There are 3 concentric walls that run around Todi. The inner wall was Etruscan, the middle Roman, and the outside medieval. Each of them built further from the center as the city expanded in size. On top there's a statue of an eagle holding a tablecloth in its claws, which symbolizes the founding of Todi by the ancient Umbria tribe way back in prehistory, because they snatched the cloth from people in the valley below and flew up here and dropped it, which they took as an omen of a place to build a city. As the road continues south of this arch, it changes names to Via Matteotti, but it's a less interesting residential area. If you were to walk all the way to the end of it, you'd reach another set of gates called Porta Romana. However, it's an 800-meter round-trip walk, which I don't recommend. Instead, turn around and walk back up through Porta Catena, where we shall venture into some side lanes for more discoveries. We're back on Via Roma, just north of Porta Catena, and there's this interesting side street these fellows are walking down, Via Cesio della Piana. It will lead down and around to a scenic viewpoint, and then back up on a different route. Then we'll continue on to San Fortunato Church up on the hill for another viewpoint. The round trip from Via Roma is about 300 meters, slightly downhill and then slightly uphill coming back. This kind of an optional little walk through these narrow zigzag alleyways is for the visitor who has sufficient time. In my case, I was spending the night in Todi, so I had 2 days to walk around. One day to cover the main sites, and then a few hours here and there to get off and just go wander and get a little bit lost, hoping for a few nice surprises, like these views looking out across the countryside and up at the town of Todi, perched up on its ridge. It turns out there are some very old and tall residential structures here, constructed out of some huge chunks of stone, and what seems to be different layers of types of stone. At the bottom, apparently, this is part of the first stone wall built by the Etruscans, using those massive blocks of stone. And then above it, the stones get a little bit smaller. That was later construction on top of the ancient walls. The different patterns are almost like the stratigraphic layers of an archaeological exhibit, showing different styles and periods of construction, all in one building that's still occupied today. That was certainly worth a little detour off of the main lane of town to get down here and see these old buildings on interesting back streets with some little gardens. Yet another reason to spend a couple of days in Todi so you have time for these side trips. And now there's a little alley that will take us right back up to the main lane. It's Vicolo San Silvestro, which will connect us once again to Via Roma. This is a busy little intersection with a few cars going by and pedestrians and a dog waiting for its master. Here it's called Via Roma. There's a little food store, a bar. It's a center of activity. Again, this is the main street of Todi. North of here where we started, it's called Via Cavour, and south where we just came from, at Matteotti. Via Santa Maria in Camuccia also branches off from this intersection. It's another narrow residential lane with no shops but marvelous old buildings, with many houses and apartments clustered in tightly. Have a look at some of the courtyards and hidden staircases as you walk along. We are definitely into the far back lanes, well off the beaten track of most tourist itineraries. For the dedicated urban walker, it's fun to make these little deviations deeper into the heart of southern Todi, especially into this labyrinth of tall buildings towering over the narrow path, which becomes a stone-lined maze, with more intriguing little back lanes to tempt you. This kind of medium-rise high density was created in the Middle Ages, and it makes a very livable kind of city, where everything is in walking distance. With quiet pedestrian lanes and no automobile traffic, our lane ends at another gate, Porta Aurea. built by the Romans in the middle wall. From here we get a nice view looking up at the bell tower of San Fortunato that we shall soon climb for a grand view. And there's a convenient staircase that will bring us right up the hill. From here you'll get some lovely views, and there are many little paths and stairs and green lawns that you can enjoy here scattered throughout the park. But we're just taking a quick look and walking downhill from here back into the urban part of town. Down a two-way staircase. It's a busy intersection leading off in three different directions, including heading towards the Church of San Fortunato, where we are heading next to climb the tower for the view. But before going up the church tower, let's take a little walk along Via Lorenzo Leoni. It's another one of those intriguing lanes, quite level with nice paving, so it makes for a good walk, lined with more of those attractive old buildings. There are a few cars that will squeeze through on what seems to be a pedestrian lane, but after all, there have to be deliveries made and people live along the street and need to be able to drive home. It's fun to take these little detours while you're walking along on a main lane. You see the side street going down, a staircase going up. You don't know what's around the bend, so go ahead and go down, check it out, have a look. Some of the side lanes, however, are strictly for pedestrians. This lady walking downhill in her stilettos finds that it's not even a street, it becomes a staircase, the Via della Misericordia. It went down to Via Roma, which we've already seen, so we just turned around and walked right back up again. With these little alleys, sometimes you'll be going back and forth, and that's quite okay. Which brings us around to a major landmark of Todi, San Fortunato Church. Construction began in 1292, and yet they never quite finished the upper part of the facade. The central portal leads directly into the nave. Elegant ribbed columns support the Gothic vaulting, with 13 side chapels, some decorated in the Baroque style. All of that is nice, but we have really come to climb the steps up to the tower for the viewpoint. And you will see that it's quite a hike. You don't want to run up, but we're speeding things along for you so it doesn't take all day to reach the top. Actually, it's a pretty easy climb, just take your time. You'll find it's worth the effort. It is a grand view from the highest point in town, with the Duomo in the distance and the green hills all around. The Renaissance Church of Santa Maria della Consolazione, located next to town on the southwest side, was designed in the style of Bramante. Porta Perugina is one of the original surviving gates of the outer wall on the south edge of town, with more clay tile roofs and old buildings around it. The church was built by the Franciscan order in the Gothic style, with a large nave to facilitate their preaching. Upon exiting, walk down the front steps to look back up and have a fine view of the facade. Then we'll walk to a little park a few blocks away with the best view of Todi. At this point, you'll enjoy a sweeping vista of this hillside town from the Oberdon Garden. It's a terrace with a great lookout, and it's also the place where you can catch the funicular that goes down to the public parking lot where you can get your car and drive away after you've completed your visit to Todi. We're not finished with our visit yet. We have more to see of the north end of Todi, but just to show you while we're here how to access this funicular. This service is called the Ascensore or Funivia, and it's completely free. It operates from 7 in the morning until midnight, which makes it very easy to park your car down below in this large parking area, because tourists are not supposed to drive their cars inside the old town. Now we'll go back up to the gardens and continue with our walking tour. We had walked down from the Church of San Fortunato to the viewpoint. From the gardens, we're walking 1 block over to Piazza Jacapone. Then we'll continue up through Piazza del Popolo to the north end of town. Piazza Jacapone is a popular gathering spot for young people during the day and right into the evening. Conveniently located near the center of town, it's a good place to meet up with your friends, perhaps because of the gelato shop here. And there's one of the oldest restaurants in town, Trattoria Jacapone. Also, there's a bus stop for local and intercity buses here. Another attraction of this piazza is the 4-star Hotel Fonte Cesia, one of the best in town. Its 36 rooms are in a restored ancient building from the 17th century, in a perfect location. Just next to the piazza is the Municipal Theater of Todi, Teatro Comunale, opened in 1876 with an opera by Giuseppe Verdi. A large number of shows are regularly presented, including stage plays, dance presentations, full orchestra symphonies, operettas and musicals, or solo performances, as I happened to catch the evening I was in town. So check the theater schedule, and if something's going on, take advantage and enjoy the show. Enhanced by the elegant architectural beauty of the theater, which has 500 seats, room for everybody. We'll see more of Todi at night later, but now we're heading over to the Piazza del Popolo to continue our walking tour in the north part of town. Then we'll return to the piazza for another look. A lane on the right side of the Duomo will lead you into the northern part of town, where we enter another tangle of lanes with the main street and many little side alleys branching off from it. Looking up at the high side wall of the Duomo, and beyond it the Palazzo del Vignola, built in late 16th century by the noble Corradi family, and then acquired by the bishop and turned into the seminary of Todi. Now a secular building hosting events and exhibitions. Our route is taking us north, continuing on Via Borgo, then reaching the Perugina gate at the end of town, with a few excursions into those little side alleyways. Via del Duomo is the main street of this neighborhood, rather straight and nicely paved and an easy downhill stroll, with intriguing little side lanes branching off that beckon some investigation. Sometimes it's just a residential courtyard leading into the private homes. And you'll see dozens of short arches that are connecting the buildings together and stabilizing them from earthquakes. In some walls you'll see what had been an open arch now filled in as the building evolved over time. We're still on that main lane, which has now changed names from Duomo to Prassede. If you step down a side lane here, you can get a nice view over some of the old houses and the landscape beyond. These large stones are part of the first city wall constructed in the 3rd century BC by the Etruscans, which are some of the oldest remains in Todi. We'll see remnants of the later 2 walls coming up soon, but first a little look down some side lanes.
It's Via della Malerita. It goes right next to the Duomo as Via del Duomo, and then it keeps going down and changes names a few times. There's some cross streets, and it's worth exploring. Let's go see what's down at the end of this road.
While walking along, your eye is going to be attracted to these little side lanes on both sides. Sometimes it's a courtyard, other times it's an alley with an arch, such as Vicolo de Bovellini translates loosely as cow path. There are some surprisingly tall buildings here, a reminder that way back as far as the Middle Ages, they lived in multi-story apartment buildings.
This arch is part of the second wall that goes around the town, which would have been the Roman wall.
Secondo Cerchio delle Mura.
The earliest wall is the Etruscan wall in the center of town, and then the next biggest one out was the Roman, and then finally the third wall in the larger version was the medieval wall.
We'll get to that outer wall in a few minutes, but first we've got to walk there. This gateway marks the boundary of the ancient Roman city, and it's also the point at which this road changes names from Prassede to Borgo. Todi became a Roman colony and municipium in the 1st century BC and experienced the typical Roman development, with fragmentary remains found throughout town.
And it's a busy street. Cars come driving right through the ancient arch. There are many arches through the various walls of this town, and many arches on the little lanes. It's really a beautiful collection of old stone architecture.
While there are nearly a dozen of these monumental arches still standing, we know from historical records there are many others that have disappeared. Yet it's amazing how many of the old buildings of town are preserved and fully utilized as contemporary housing. The view from that main lane is somewhat constricted by the buildings around it, but step off into the side lanes and you can look out across the lower town and across the fields and the lower Tiber River Valley, with productive farms and rolling hills in the distance. Return over to Via Borgo and continue walking north.
And then if you walk all the way down the hill, you get to the final series of arches that are in the outer wall.
Porta Perugina was built in the middle of the 13th century as part of the medieval wall around the town. It has an elaborately fortified multi-arch structure, and because there are not very many exits from this walled city, it's a fairly busy roadway, and spectacular from the outside. They built this larger medieval wall because the population of the town kept increasing, and today the wall extends for 4 kilometers all the way around the town. From here you connect into the Umbrian road system. There's also a bus stop with a fairly extensive local bus routing available for you. There's something very special about the beautiful scenery all around Todi. It's just a sublime rhythm of low hills and lush vegetation, especially colorful in the late afternoon golden light. Heading back inside the city walls, you'll notice more of the residential cluster. It's like the small town is divided up into even smaller villages. To reach these slightly out-of-the-way places and experience something beyond the usual tourist sites, it's helpful to spend a night or two in Todi.
It's easy walking downhill, but then you've got to turn around and hike back up. It's about a half a mile and fairly steep, but worth it to see the entire extent of these medieval walls.
From here, we'll walk back up to the main piazza, retracing our step. It's not far. You can get there in 10 minutes, not difficult, and proceed from there into our next adventure. Before taking another look around the piazza, we're going to have a walk on those little lanes that are on both sides of this piazza. Starting to the east along Via San Lorenzo. Typical of all of Todi, this too is a residential neighborhood with quiet little lanes, even though we're just blocks from the busy center of town. With people living in close proximity, it's quite easy for the parents to walk their kids to the local elementary school. And for others, it's a nice place to walk your dog. It is that kind of small town atmosphere where everybody seems to know each other, and even the dogs know each other, as they play around with the frisky greeting. Little dog encounters always give neighbors a chance to stop for a friendly chat. Around the corner, I found an amazing place to eat. Ristorante Umbria, serving traditional Umbrian local wines, soups, game, pasta with aromatic herbs, vegetable fries, truffles, and porcini mushrooms. Chef Fausto Todini was among the first Umbrians to receive a Michelin star back in the 70s. While the dining rooms are beautiful, the terrace in the back provides probably the finest outdoor place to eat in Todi, transforming this into a destination restaurant that people flock to from many miles away.
The hotel I'm staying at in Todi is called San Lorenzo Tre, and it's a small, charming 4-star hotel right next to the Duomo. You couldn't be more central in the heart of medieval Todi. And the hotel is more like a house. There's singles and doubles in a larger room with a view and various price levels, and a lovely breakfast is served each morning. And it's like you're part of a family when you're staying at this charming little hotel.
And then the manager told us a little bit more about the hotel.
Welcome to the San Lorenzo Tre in Todi. We have 6 rooms, very typical, very quiet, and very most central hotel in Todi.
The hotel offers wonderful views from its terrace, and from some of the rooms you might be lucky enough to look out on a lush scene. And you're welcome to take a stroll in their private garden.
In this side, we can see Appenine Hill in the countryside.
You see the Apennine Hills in the distance where they are able to find truffles. Some of the main crops here are corn for polenta and grapes for wine. It is definitely worth spending a night or two in Todi because there is so much to see, so much to do, and it's a little tricky getting here, so as long as you've gone to the effort of finding Todi, drop anchor and stay put for a while. Another little neighborhood to explore is just to the west side of Piazza del Popolo. The lanes dip down and up, they become staircases. Many don't have labels. It's almost like entering the Bermuda Triangle where you're sure to get lost, but it's a very small area. And it's a residential neighborhood. Typical of the Italian hill towns, the homes are packed in very tightly together in an efficient use of space. The Archbishop lives here too, since we are right next to the cathedral. You're free to walk around in these narrow lanes, and when I went down the staircase to this courtyard, I found a little surprise. It looked like some kind of a well, and yes, there was water in this cistern. Looking around at the stonework and up at the arch, you can't help but get the feeling this is an ancient neighborhood. It must be many centuries old. Then you'll arrive at a terrace where the space opens up dramatically with this grand view looking out across the countryside. The Convent of Montesanto dates back to the year 1235. Built as a monastery for nuns, it later became a fortress during the medieval wars and then converted once again back into a convent for nuns, which it remains to this day. It's sometimes possible to stay here for a few nights on a spiritual retreat. When you turn around and look at the views from this terrace in another direction, you see the backsides of the old stone houses of Todi nestled along the hillside, their wood fireplaces blowing picturesque smoke out the chimneys. We get these views from the terrace of another monastery, which has been converted into a museum with a beautifully painted interior and artifacts from the ancient days of sculpture and ceramics, displayed in the former church of the convent, now called the Lapidary Museum. It's got one of the most ancient collections in Umbria and displays that long history of the town from the Roman age to the Renaissance and up through modern times. The museum is located just a block away from the Duomo and the Piazza del Popolo, so it's easy to get here. Now I'm going to take you on a walk off the beaten track into the heart of the medieval town where people still live. It's a wonderful tangle of lanes just a few blocks to the west of the main shopping lane and the main piazza that makes a lovely stroll through these alleys passing these ancient stone buildings. You might get a little lost in here, but don't worry, it's a small neighborhood. And it's the kind of activity that you don't find in most guidebooks, a simple walk into an authentic residential place filled with the ancient charm of the Middle Ages. And then after 10 or 15 minutes of wandering around, you'll probably find yourself surprisingly back at the Piazza del Popolo, the main square of town. Ever since the Romans first built their town, this was the center, their forum, where everything happened. A place for shopping, eating out, government functions, just like we do today. A place where families can set their kids loose, sometimes to turn it into a big playground or racetrack. When you're here in the off-season, it seems like it's only locals hanging out in the piazza, and a tourist with a camera is a bit of a novelty for the kids to put on a little show for. Because Todi is such an old city, built up over the centuries in a very dense residential style, this is one of the only open spaces in the heart of town. Todi's Civic Museum is located on the piazza, and it's fairly small with about 6 galleries, so as long as you're here, go on up and have a quick look around. In this 30-second summary, you'll get a quick glimpse of some of the archaeology, the pottery, the paintings, and the architecture inside this nice little museum. They've got some old guns, cabinetry, a scale model of Todi's Temple of Santa Maria della Consolazione, painted wooden statues from the Renaissance and earlier Byzantine paintings, and when done, you step right back into the piazza. Directly underneath the paving of this piazza are some incredible ancient Roman remains. It's a huge underground water storage system that's still preserved today called the Roman cistern, and it's open to the public. You can actually walk through them, as we'll show you right now. This is how the ancient Romans maintained a steady water supply for their town. There are 12 large rectangular rooms made of Roman concrete and rock, covered by barrel vaults that extend about 8 meters high. The rooms are connected by arched passageways. The ancient Romans were unable to build their typical aqueducts to bring water in because Todi stands on the top of an isolated hill, surrounded for miles by lower fields. But they could bring water into these tanks by surface runoff and from some underground wells, which also controlled erosion and stabilized the city. Part of this system remained in use all the way up through the 19th century as a public water reserve. Just downhill from the piazza are the fountains of Scannabecco, built in 1241, with 4 water basins used as a sink for the ancient housewives as well as a source of drinking water for people and horses. Along with these underground water tanks, there is an additional 3 kilometers of underground tunnels and galleries, dozens of pre-Roman, Roman, and medieval cisterns, hundreds of wells from various eras. It's like an underground city, and you can walk through a lot of it. There are guided tours that you can hook onto that will show you these amazing sights. Palazzo de Priori stands at the southern end, which houses the courthouse and more city offices. It's 800 years old. The rectangular tower was added in 1367. The cathedral is a bit older than that, constructed from the 12th century in what's called the Lombard style, similar to the Romanesque. In later centuries, it was frequently renovated and altered, with the facade completed in the early 1500s. The nave is flanked by 2 wide aisles with rows of Corinthian columns and graceful arches, with stained glass rose window from the early 16th century and a frescoed Last Judgment similar to Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. You're always welcome to come and pray or perhaps even attend Mass if a service is on during your visit. In the evening, the piazza is even more beautiful than during the daytime, especially at twilight, that magic hour. And you might be lucky enough to catch a beautiful sunset just around the corner at Piazza Giuseppe Garibaldi, one of the famous vistas and lookout points of the city. Because the town is up on a hill, there are a variety of locations where you can get these great views of the sunrise and the sunset, if you're visiting here for longer than a day trip. Twilight is an ideal time to be out walking around. The lighting is very pleasant with the lingering blue sky, and you've got lights on. Time for the Italians to enjoy their passeggiata, that social stroll that ends the day when there's still blue sky. The lights come on and it's time for dinner. So of course at that time the main piazza attracts more and more people, old and young alike. This is a place where families enjoy time together strolling around and friends have a conversation catching up on the day's activities. The perfect place to complete your passeggiata is at the ever-popular Caffè Serranio. Now we're going back once again to that main street, Corso Cavour, for an evening shopping stroll. This is what you might call downtown Todi. The street is not exactly pedestrian street, but it's pedestrian friendly. Cars do come through, but they drive very slowly in this narrow lane. So it's the perfect place to end your day with a little people watching, maybe get a snack, sit down for some gelato. There's a few restaurants nearby, and there's also intriguing little side lanes that you might want to explore as well. Let's have a look at the upper blocks of Corso Cavour, which is the main cluster of shops in the town. They don't have a department store or a shopping mall, but here along this retail strip of Corso Cavour, you'll find a nice variety of goods. There's clothing, there's food, jewelry, gift shops, shoe stores. It's especially nice in the evening when the shops stay open till 8 p.m. And it's probably about as far as most tourists ever get when they visit the main piazza a block away. They'll come down here but unfortunately they've missed out on everything else that we've been showing you in today's program. This is a very nice shopping zone, but there is so much more to see. Thank you for staying with me to the end of this long appreciation of the beautiful town of Todi. And now you must come here and see it for yourself. I'd like to end with some practical information about how to get to Todi. If you've rented a car, you could drive here from Rome, for example, in an hour and a half. If you are using public transportation, you might find that the best way to get here is by bus, which connects from many of the main cities of Umbria, and the bus will deliver you very close to the old town. If you're coming by train, it's a little challenging, but it can be done. The train runs on a smaller line, not part of the main intercity system, but you can get here, for example, from Perugia. On this train map of Umbria, the red lines show the regional railroad routes.
The train to Todi is on a private Umbrian train line. It's not part of the main Italian rail system. So you can connect into this train line in one of several major cities, such as Perugia, or in Terni, where the Italian train line and the local Umbrian train line connect.
You'll have some decent scenery of open farmlands along the way. But when the train arrives at Todi, the station is a few miles outside of town. But you can easily connect into town with the local bus, which stops right at the train station. It's about a 15-minute bus ride to town, and along the way you'll have some scenery, including a look at one of the old fortified walls that runs around the lower part of town. Conveniently, the bus arrives in the center of town, passing San Fortunato Church and arriving at Piazza Jacapone that we've seen earlier in the program, a popular bus stop. The local kids are hanging out waiting for their bus. From this point, you can walk to Piazza del Popolo in 2 minutes. A few final thoughts about Umbria, which is not as well known as Tuscany,
but it's very similar, equally beautiful, and in some ways more charming because it's a little bit less crowded, a little bit less touristic, and it has these amazing towns, Perugia, Gubbio, and Spoleto, and Spello, and Assisi, the most famous of Umbrian towns. And then finally here we are in Todi, a spectacular place.
we've also got videos about other cities in Umbria, including Spoleto and Perugia. And then come along to Gubbio, Assisi, and Spello. You can find them all in our collection. We frequently upload new movies, so please subscribe to our channel and click that little alarm bell so you'll be notified. And if you enjoyed the movie, how about a thumbs up? And we always welcome comments down below. Or if you have questions about the destination, make note and we'll answer them. Thanks for watching.